Welcome to Bible study. This is the study we're preparing for Sunday, January 30th. Now, as you may have read with the email announcement I'm putting out, we're not going to actually have a Bible study this week. We're going to be talking with Pastor Olson about the possibility of joint ministry. But I wanted to do something with you in our study of David. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. We will gather up any thoughts that you have that you may want to address to this on the following Sunday, on February 6th, when we'll have another video as well to talk about one of the Psalms. But today, I want to really take us into an aspect of the end of chapter 15 that we talked about last week, and chapters 16 and 17 of 2 Samuel that I think are really interesting and important for the way that we read them and for the way that they continue to speak to us today. If you remember, at the end of chapter 15, King David was fleeing for his life. His son Absalom had risen up against him as sort of a consequence to his own David's own destruction of the house of Uriah the Hittite by his own actions. This has sort of fallen down upon David's head. And now David was running away, fleeing Jerusalem to the east. And that's actually kind of significant for this, because that's the direction the Jewish people would have fled from Jerusalem or been taken from Jerusalem as they were brought into exile. The thing I want to really focus on today is that David in this chapter, and as we read through some of the elements of this, David and his helpers and the people who are with him, they look very much like the exiled people of God. David has a little mini exile here. And the way that David deals with this and the way that this works, I think, is designed to be instructive for God's exiled people, but really is instructive for us as we deal with adversity and setback and really being out of the center of things as the people of God, as we find ourselves perhaps in positions in which we are less influential than we once were. So Absalom comes and David makes ready to go. And I think it's very interesting that in chapter 15, David does a couple of really interesting things. First, when the high priests come out, and they've got men carrying the Ark of the Covenant, David sends them back. He says, no, the Ark of the Covenant never goes into exile. God never goes into exile. If I have found favor with God, he will bring me back here. But I am not going to take God with me. He's not mine. And so David sends it back. But then he does something very interesting, is that he says, hey, but your two boys, send them back with you too. But I'm going to be over here in the wilderness. If you have a message you need to get to me, send them. What David is essentially doing in the end of chapter 15 is he's setting up a spy network, and he's setting up a communications network and an intelligence network, so that even though he has fled and is in the wilderness, he is still able to learn about what's going on, get information, and even through Hushai, whom he also sends back, an aged counselor of his, and says, work your way into the council room of Absalom, pretend to be his new counselor, or to be a counselor faithful to him as you've been faithful to me, and thwart the advice of Ahithophel, this widely acclaimed advisor that David had seen before. And both of these plans are going to play out over this next chapter. In chapter 16, David passes a little bit beyond the summit of the Mount of Olives, and who shows up but Ziba. Ziba, if you don't remember, was the servant of King Saul. And Ziba had been appointed as the person who was taking care of Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth. And Ziba shows up with a bunch of things. He shows up with 100 bunches of raisins, 100 summer fruit, a skin of wine. And the king said, Ziba, what are you doing? And Ziba says, this is for you. And he says, well, where's Mephibosheth? And he says, Mephibosheth is back in the house thinking he's going to be king today. Now, it's very interesting that later on Mephibosheth denies all of this, and we don't know exactly who's telling the truth here. Now we have this other instance of when you're in this kind of a situation, it can be really hard to sort out, to discern who's telling the truth. Initially, David gives to Ziba all of the land that he had given to Mephibosheth. David says, well, if Mephibosheth believes he's going to be king today, if he has turned on me, everything that he has is yours. We'll see how that plays out. Then along comes Shimei. Shimei was of the tribe of Benjamin, and if you remember, King Saul had been of the tribe of Benjamin, and the Benjamites had really benefited from Saul's administration. He had, shall we say, spread the largesse of being king among his own tribal members. And that was no longer true because David was now of the tribe of Judah, and presumably David was spreading some of these things around in the tribe of Judah. And Shimei comes and starts cursing David. When King David came to Bahurim, a man of the family of the house of Saul came out, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. He came out cursing. He threw stones at David and at all the servants of King David. Now all the people and all the warriors who were on his right and on his left, and Shimei shouted while he cursed, out, out, murderer, scoundrel! The Lord has avenged on all of you the blood of the house of Saul, in whose places you have reigned, and the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. See, disaster has overtaken you, for you are a man of blood. He's gloating over what is happening to David. And he says, you deserve it. Well, remember, David kind of does. Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, one of David's generals, says, David, why should this dead dog curse my lord and king? Let me go over and take off his head. Let me go kill him. But David said, what have I to do with you, sons of Zeruiah? Why are you guys so violent all the time? This is Joab's brother, by the way. If he is cursing because the Lord has said to him, curse David, then who shall say, why have you done so? David said to Abishai and to all the servants, my own son is seeking my life. How much more may this Benjamite? I mean, at least, he's actually has kind of a legitimate reason, because I did usurp his father's throne. Let him alone, let him curse, for the Lord has bidden him, and maybe the Lord will look upon my distress and he will repay me with good for this cursing that I'm doing today. Notice David doesn't seek vengeance. And I think there is one of the really critical things that the Deuteronomist wants people to know about this trip out. That in exile and in the course of being exiled, people are going to do and to say things that are really hurtful and harmful. And they're going to be saying things to you. They're going to curse you. How will you react to that? David, remember, last week had spoken this psalm of absolute trust in God. And David is very much here sort of saying, God's going to have to settle the score. I will not. And, that's not bad advice. That's not bad advice. David is really saying to the people, or to his own people at the time, we are not here to settle scores. We're not going to start fighting with each other and fighting with the people who are, even the people who are gloating over our demise, because we don't have time. We don't have time for this. And God sees and maybe God will bring it to peace. God will settle scores for us. So David walks out, and there's this guy on the hill just throwing stones and dirt at them, and he's hurling all of these insults, and David just walks on by. David comes to the Jordan. There he rests for a little bit. And now we get David's intelligence network coming into play. Absalom and all the Israelites come to Jerusalem. Ahithophel was with him. When Hushai the Archite comes, remember this is the guy David has planted in the palace to try and thwart the counsel of Ahithophel. He says, "Long live the king." Absalom said, "Aren't you my father's advisor? Wasn't your loyalty to my dad?" And Hushai said, "No, I am loyal to the one who sits on this throne, not to an individual." Then Absalom says to Ahithophel, "What should we do?" And Ahithophel gives him two major pieces of advice. He first says, do the things that assume kingly authority. And one of those is to sleep with David's concubines. But then he says a second piece of advice, and that is he says, don't let David slip away. Let me take 12,000 men today, and I will chase David down, and I promise you we will not kill a lot of David's people, but we will slay only David. This was probably the best advice. It would have quickly ended the insurgency by removing the opposition. It's good advice, at least in terms of being realpolitik and seeing this thing through. But Hushai says, no, don't do that. Don't do that. What you need to do is come at him with overwhelming force. David is a cagey old fighter. You don't want to go out after him with only a half measure. You want to bring all of Israel together. You want to overwhelm them, and you want to crush David's opposition. Well, it's not good advice, because what it does is it gives David time to coalesce and to get his forces in order and to be able to turn around and confront Absalom. But God had designed to thwart the counsel of Ahithophel, and so Hushai's counsel wins out, even though Hushai is deliberately working against the right idea. So now here's another little thing. What do you do when you're in exile? David says, or the Deuteronomist seems to be saying that sometimes you are going to have to use subterfuge. Sometimes you're going to have to be crafty. And sometimes you're going to have to be someone who has to kind of hide a little bit of your true intent. Because in order to succeed, in order to be able to do what you want to do, you may be sometimes asked to work with the enemy. And you may have to occasionally, in this case, thwart the good advice of somebody who is working against the kingdom of God. Then Hushai says to the priests Zadok and Abiathar, "Thus and so did Ahithophel counsel, and thus and so did I counsel. Now, send quickly and tell David, don't lodge tonight at the fords of the wilderness, but by all means cross over." In other words, don't get trapped on this side of the river. Get across that river quickly. So Jonathan and Ahimaaz, the two sons of the priests, are sent. They're waiting at En-Rogel, because they don't dare go into the city. They know this, so they've got this worked out. A servant girl is going to go out and tell them. But a boy saw them, went away quickly, and saw them and told Absalom. So their cover is blown. They go to a man at Bahurim who had a well in his courtyard. They jump into the well. The man takes a covering and stretches out over the well's mouth and spreads grain on it so he conceals it. This woman, when they question her, where did these boys go? She says, they went across the river. And they go looking for them, they don't find them, and the boys escape, and they end up being able to get word to King David. Well, again, notice how they really look like people who are fleeing for their lives. And this little story is told with incredible detail. She spreads the grain over the top and all of these things. That had to feel familiar to people who had been hiding, who had been running for their lives. I think of the stories of people during the Holocaust, and the measures, that people like Anne Frank and others went to hide themselves. It's a familiar story. And here's King David, the high priest's sons, the messengers to King David, dependent on this young girl who brings them the news, this woman who covers it and hides them, these people it's this little network of individuals who are making this thing happen. That's what life is going to be like. That's what life was like for King David. How did David deal with this? And again, notice that David will be the center of this. He's the one who speaks with faith. So David comes to Mahanaim, Shobi the son of Nahash from Rabbah of the Ammonites, and Machir the son of Ammiel from Lodabar, and Barzillai the Gileadite. These are all people on the other side of the river. They bring beds and basins and earthen vessels. They bring wheat and barley and meal. In other words, David has friends, people who are helping him. And so it will be for the people in exile. They're going to have people who have friends. And there will be individuals who step forward and give you help. So what is this really saying to exiled people? And what is this saying to us? Well, I believe it's saying something pretty important. And I think primarily it is trust God. Because David was helped throughout this entire thing. Sometimes it was kind of by the narrowest of threads that things were hanging, this girl and the hiding of these boys and all of these things. It was just a near thing. But God was there for him. God provided for him resources and help that he probably didn't even know he had. And yet God was there for him. Don't lose hope that God has plans that sometimes run through deep and dark valleys and sometimes are difficult. As David himself says, your rod and your staff, they comfort me, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Notice it doesn't say, thanks God for being with me, so I never have to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. No, it says God goes with me into that. And David, in this deep, dark hour, when he is fleeing from his life, there is this rebellion that looks like it's going to win, that it looks like David is going to be cast out and slain by his own son. That's a dark valley. That's a difficult day. And David remains true to character here. He doesn't take vengeance. He lets God be God and lets David be David, and doesn't try and be what he is not. Rather, he's able to see the people around him in the light of what God has said and done. So Shimei, the Benjamite, may have been sent to curse him, may have been actually somebody that God has delegated to do this to me. And so if it's wrong, God will see it. And God may bless me because I've endured a wrong. God will bring his vengeance. And if he's right, then who am I to oppose him? Because God may have sent him. These chapters really form a strong call to us to be faithful, to trust. It's hard, because in these difficult days, dark days that David sees, which sometimes look a little like our days, it can be easy to grasp for and to look for solutions of our own making and of our own contrivance. This doesn't say that David doesn't do things, and please don't get me wrong. He establishes his intelligence network. He gets the communication system up and running. He's doing things, but again and again what he's saying is, my life and the success of all of these things, this is in the hand of God, not mine. We look forward to seeing you and from hearing more about this with you. And we will see you on February 6th. God bless you.